In 1868, William Corbin began to charge his neighbours to see his daughter. This may sound strange, yet everyone was curious to see the little girl. But why? Well, the girl had been born with 4 legs, and little Josephine would later join a sideshow and gained fame as the 4-legged girl. But how did this come to be? And what was her life like as a human spectacle? Join me to find out. Josephine Myrtle Corbin was born in Lincoln County in Tennessee on the 12th of May 1868. Her parents were William Corbin, a wounded Confederate soldier, and Nancy Corbin. Nancy's maiden name was Sullins, which was probably a derivative of the Irish O'Sullivan, and this may have been changed due to the prevailing anti-Irish sentiment at the time. Her parents were of humble origins, and in later years, owing to Josephine's medical anomaly, it was speculated that her parents were actually closely related, and perhaps that they were even brother and sister. However, there is no concrete evidence to suggest that this was the case, or that any form of inbreeding was responsible for Josephine's medical issues. Josephine's birth was apparently fairly normal, though it was immediately clear that there were unusual features to her anatomy. This led to medical reports and extensive records being produced in the first weeks of her life, principally by medical observers. Yet, the abnormalities aside, she was clearly not in any physical pain, and her mother, Nancy, did not present any major problems during conception. Nevertheless, it was evident soon after Josephine was born that she was suffering from a condition which is known today as dipygus, though at the time it was medically undiagnosed and unclear exactly what caused it. Dipygus is also known in Latin as Terrascata didymum, while a crueler name for it in the past was monster twinned below. It is the most severe form of what is known as caudal duplication syndrome. This is defined as the association between malformations and duplications of the systems involving the gastrointestinal, reproductive and genitourinary neurotubes, and the appearance of defects therein. How common this is and the exact reasons for why this occurs are not fully known to this day, but it is widely understood that it is a very rare condition. A study of it which appeared in the Journal of the Indian Association of Pediatric Surgeons in 2014 speculated that there were just a handful of confirmed cases in the 19th and 20th centuries, of which Josephine was one of the very few. What this means in practical terms is that individuals who suffer from the condition have certain parts of the caudal region and neurotube around what we would typically call the pelvis duplicated in themselves. The term caudal duplication syndrome was only defined in 1993 in medical context, so it was extremely unheard of when Josephine was born in Tennessee in 1868. In her particular instance, she was born with 2 pelvises, which presented side by side next to each other, below her waist. As a result, she also developed 4 legs, 2 from each pelvis. However, these were not of equal strength and girth. The 2 outer legs on the left and right developed as normal legs, which could carry her weight, but the inner 2 legs were much shorter and weaker, and only had 3 toes. Thus, while Josephine was possessed of 4 legs and had some limited control over the 2 weaker inner legs, she relied on her stronger outer legs to walk, much the same as anyone else. Nevertheless, there was a general form of normality to which she presented herself in later years. For instance, photos of her from the late 19th century and the early 20th centuries indicate that she wore stockings and boots of a matching shape and design on all 4 feet and legs, albeit of a different size, as her inner feet were of a very small size by comparison with her outer feet and legs. An extra point to bear in mind when evaluating how an individual with dipygus develops is that this is generally developed from an embryo which would have otherwise separated into twins, but because of an unusual set of circumstances, developed into one individual. In fact, what we see in Josephine's condition was the tiny body of her twin, which only developed waist down and was malformed. Josephine's condition was considered exceptionally unusual in her own time, and as a consequence, she was widely discussed within the medical literature of Gilded Age America from the time of her birth. From the very start, this was far from politically correct, or ethically correct by today's standards. For instance, a pamphlet published in 1869, when she was just 1 year old, referred to her as a well-formed and fully developed female child, 1 year old, born in Lincoln County, Tennessee. She's the most remarkable freak of nature now living, and whose complex nature is creating more sensation among scientific men than any curiosity ever before known. This tendency continued throughout the subsequent decades, as Josephine's story was continued and followed extensively. For instance, a brief account of her which appeared in the American Journal of Obstetrics in 1888, when she was 20 years of age, referred to Josephine as a unique monstrosity. Writing a year later, Lewis Whaley, a physician writing for the British Medical Journal and several other medical journals and news outlets, was more sympathetic when he stated that she is about 5 feet high, has fair skin, blue eyes and curly hair, and is very intelligent. A stranger to see her in company would only think her unusually broad across her hips, and with a carriage usual to one with clubbed foot. I have known Mrs. B since she was a tiny child, as the four-legged girl, but never realized the perfect dual development of both external and internal genital organs until she became my patient in a case of pregnancy. What later was revealed to be unusual about Josephine's case was that, while she generally had intercourse in one of her pelvises, she became pregnant on the other side. She expressed some surprise at this unusual state of affairs, but it was later reported by Whaley that, although an abortion had to be carried out for medical reasons in the case of one of her pregnancies, she managed to carry the others through to full term. When Josephine was just 1 month old, her father began showing her to curious neighbours for a dime. This helped to provide for her impoverished family, and she soon made a living from her rare medical condition. She was born and grew up in an age when the idea of the quote-unquote sideshow or freak show was in its prime in America and Europe. Such terminology would be considered extremely politically incorrect today, but by the standards of the Gilded Age in America, it was deemed acceptable to put people into circuses and sideshows who had medical anomalies or peculiar appearances. Thus, shows like that of P.T. Barnum, or what eventually became the Barnum and Bailey Circus, and the Ringling Brothers Show, featured people with extreme forms of dwarfism or gigantism, and other rare medical conditions which were considered highly unusual at the time. Josephine was first hired into one of these shows in the early 1880s, when she was just 13 years of age. This was in part down to the nationwide publicity she gained after her father placed various ads in the newspaper. Somewhat cruelly, she was referred to as the four-legged girl from Texas. The reason this was Texas and not Tennessee was because her family had relocated to the Lone Star State from Tennessee by that time. Promotional pamphlets produced at the time described her as being gentle of disposition as the summer sunshine and as happy as the day is long, as though the expectation was that her genetic condition would have also rendered her brain psychologically disturbed. All of this aside, Josephine was an extremely successful and popular performer. At the height of her fame in the 1890s and 1900s, she was able to earn up to $450 a week, an enormous sum by the standards of the time, equivalent to around $15,000 today. Moreover, several other shows across the United States and in Europe began developing shows of what were alleged to be four-legged performers to include in their own sideshows, though most of these involved fake prosthetic legs. Despite her very unusual condition by the standards of the late 19th century, and the fact that it was not fully understood why she had ended up with dipygus, Josephine was able to have a very normal family life. When she was 19 years of age, she married James Clinton Bicknell. Their wedding photos reveal a happy union and a young woman who, despite having what would otherwise be accounted as a deformity, was very happy on the day of their nuptials. Josephine became pregnant within a year of her and James's wedding, and it was this development which led to Dr. Lewis Whaley, who, as we saw earlier, provided one of the first depictions of her condition in the medical literature, to contact her. In 1887, he described how Josephine was suffering from pains in her left side, headaches, fever, and a decreased appetite on account of falling pregnant with 2 pelvises. In several articles published in various medical journals, he explained her condition, which he described as being highly unusual and which reignited an interest in her case in the late 19th century. Despite these difficulties, Josephine and James's subsequent pregnancies were successful, and they went on to have 4 daughters and 1 son together. Curiously enough, it was later recorded that, because Josephine had effectively 2 pelvises and parts of 2 reproductive systems, 3 of her children were born from one part of her and 2 from another. Each seemed to have been relatively healthy, and the general nature of her dipygus did not impact on the vitality of her children. Despite her peculiar medical condition, Corbin lived a relatively lengthy life. She only eventually died in Cleburne, Texas on the 6th of May 1928 at 59 years of age. The cause of her death was a streptococcal skin infection, which would be easily treatable today, but which led to her death at the time owing to the lack of knowledge about the use of antibiotics. The effectiveness of penicillin, for instance, was only first discovered the year that she died. Shortly after her death, she was buried in a grave that was filled with concrete. This might seem like an excessive course of action, yet it was necessary at the time, as there was legitimate concerns that Corbin's body would be exhumed and put on display. Thus, when her funeral had been completed, her family members held a vigil by her gravesite until such a time as the concrete had dried, and they could be sure that she would not become the victim of a grave robber. Thus, her body was laid to rest peacefully, despite several offers by medical practitioners and private collectors to pay a hefty sum for her body. One recent commentary by the author of her article on thehumanmarvels.com noted that Myrtle was by all accounts an interesting subject and remarkable person. Some people might have referred to people such as her as medical anomalies and other less flattering phrases at the time, but I call them incredible, persevering, resourceful, and marvelous human beings. Thank you everyone so much for watching this video on Josephine Myrtle Corbin. I hope you found her life interesting. Let me know what you thought of her life down below in the comments, and if you have any other suggestions, also leave them in the comments. I also hope you are subscribed and have notifications turned on to get all my videos as soon as I upload them. And if you want to check out any of the products I use in my videos or any other cool historical products or books, there are links to those in the description. Anyway, that's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks.